I'm here tonight to talk to you about the New York State Breeding Bird Atlas. And my name is Charles Scheim. I'm on the board of the Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society, and in fact, I'm the treasurer. But more importantly for this presentation tonight, I'm one of the coordinators for the New York State Breeding Bird Atlas for the Central Region of New York. There's about a dozen coordinators for the whole state altogether, doing different regions of the state. I've been a member of the DOAS for quite a few years. I often lead bird walks during the year, usually with my wife and birding partner, Sandy Bright. And just so everyone's clear, I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not even a professor of biology or anything like that. I'm just a retired math professor. Okay, so lots of states do breeding bird atlases. This is New York's third. I think we're the only state that has done 3 of them so far. And the main reason that any state does a breeding bird atlas is this first goal right here. We want to document what species are living and breeding in what areas of New York State. That's a really important thing to do. The data that's collected by this atlas is useful for a lot of different situations, as you can see in the goals here. But the one that I really want to focus on right now is it lets you see how bird populations are changing over time. And we know that's a really important thing right now. So for example, like I said, this is New York's third atlas. They happen every 20 years and they last for 5 years. So in 1980 was the first atlas. And as you look at the left-hand picture there, you see a few dots on the state of New York. Those are places where people found bald eagles. And the 2 darkest dots that you can see there were the only 2 breeding pairs of eagles in New York State at that time. Eagles had almost disappeared from the state, and the DEC was trying to get them back. By 2000, you can see there's a lot more places where people were finding bald eagles and a lot more of those dark dots that indicated there were breeding pairs of bald eagles in the state. Now in this atlas, we've only gone through 2 years of the atlas. We're in the 3rd year right now. And you can see all of the dark dots throughout the state, really widespread. Bald eagles have really come back. It's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, barn swallows, and in general, avian insectivores, birds that eat bugs as they're flying, have had a terrible time lately. You can see in the 1980s, they were almost everywhere in the state. In 2000, they were starting to disappear. You can see there's not quite as much dark brown, which again are the breeding pairs. There's less and less in the Adirondacks. Now in this atlas, there are big places in the state where there just are no swallows. At least experienced birders are not finding them. Here in the western part, in the northern part of the state, in the Catskills, and even in some places down on Long Island, we are not finding barn swallows because insect populations have just fallen through the floor because of pollution, because of neonicotinoids, because of habitat loss, and because of climate change. It's a bad thing. So let me start by first of all talking about what it is that atlasers do. And this talk will have 3 pieces to it. One about how the atlas is organized. That's the go birding part. A second about what we look for when we're doing the atlas. And then a third about recording the data. So you can see, here I am, I'm birding, and I'm down here somewhere in Delaware County birding. And that's what birders do. They go out and they look for birds, and so they observe birds. Now the difference though, when you're atlasing, you not only want to observe the birds, you want to observe their behaviors as well. That's the thing that we keep track of. And so like, for example, I'm really happy that I saw a kestrel right here, but in fact, I'm seeing kestrel copulation, which is an important step in the breeding process, as we all know. And then finally, I have to record my data. And we always have done that, but now we're going to use eBird to do that. And I'll talk about that tonight. So first of all, when you go birding, let's just talk about how the atlas is organized. New York State is divided up into over 5,700 blocks. Each one's about 3 miles by 3 miles. And those blocks come from the quadrants that are established by the United States Geological Survey. And so, for example, here's Delaware County and the various quadrants that are in Delaware County. And for example, here's Roxbury. And so what the BBA does is it takes each one of these quadrants, and this is a blow up of the Roxbury quadrant, and it divides that quadrant up into 6 blocks. We have Roxbury Northwest, Northeast, Central West, Central East, Southwest, and Southeast. Every single quadrant in the state gets divided up like that. And in particular, the Northwest and the Central East blocks have the designation of priority blocks in each quadrant. And so here's a little map of how it might look. Here's Roxbury, the Central East and the Northwest. And of course, over to the right would be the Northeast and the Central West, Southwest, and Southeast. Same thing for the next quadrant over, which is the Hobart quadrant, CE and W, and then the Margaretville quadrant, CE and NW, Fleischmann's quadrant, and so on. And so what you see here is this pattern of the priority blocks throughout the state. And you can see, since 2 out of 6, that's about 1/3 of all the blocks in the state are priority blocks. Now, when we say they're priority, what that means is the data from these blocks will be used by the scientists of the future to extrapolate from the atlas information that we gather. As you know, when you're a scientist, you have to work with a random sample, a representative sample of the data from the state. If everybody just submitted data from their favorite birding spot, that data would not be at all representative. In fact, it would be very biased, and we would get an unclear picture, an incorrect picture of what birds live and breed in New York State. And so for this region, we encourage atlasers to bird in priority blocks. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't bird in the other blocks as well. That's perfectly okay. But we want you to at least spend some time in priority blocks as well. And this whole block structure is what the atlas is built on. So here's a picture of a block. And the first thing to say is that when you're recording your observations, you should just record observations within a single block. And so, for example, let's say that you were following along on this purple path. Maybe you're riding your bike as you're going along some roads. And as you come to the block boundary, what you should do is stop your checklist. And then, if you want to continue birding in this second block, just start another checklist. That way, the first checklist only has birds from the bottom block. The second checklist has birds from the top block. And as you continue, when you come back to the boundary, then you should start another checklist. And that way, again, the checklist will only have birds from that block. It's important for the atlas that we get the data block by block. And so you don't want to let your checklists overlap 2 blocks. Also, for example, let's say this person who does the blue path drives along, goes around, and so on. Now that path, according to my little chart here, is 6.8 miles, which is just too long for scientific purposes. eBird and the scientists at the BBA would like you to keep your track lengths at most 5 miles. And in fact, really, they prefer even shorter. Like when Sandy and I are out birding, atlasing, we usually keep our track lengths under about 1 mile at a time. So that just means after we've gone about 1 mile, we just end that checklist and start another one. Or maybe just as we finish one road, we'll stop that checklist and start another one. And notice as you look at the block, you can see there's all kinds of habitats within a block. And you should try to visit the various habitats. Don't just concentrate on, for example, farm fields that you see. Go to all the different places, visit them at different times of year. And then, and this is something new to most birders, we want to keep separate day and night lists. So for the Atlas and eBird, nocturnal time starts 20 minutes after sunset, and it lasts until 40 minutes before sunrise. And the Atlas encourages everyone to spend some nocturnal time birding. Here's some of the guidelines. What you're going to find out as we go through this talk is that atlasers code species as either possible, probable, or confirmed breeders. Remember, we're interested in finding out what species are breeding in the state. And eventually, an atlas block will be considered complete if there's at least 55 species that have been coded. And really, for most blocks, we'd rather get the target up to about 80 species or so. And out of those birds that have been coded, at least 50% of them have been found to be breeders in the block. Also, we want to see that there's at least 20 diurnal hours invested and at least 2 nocturnal hours invested. So this is why it's important to keep both diurnal and nocturnal lists. But that might sound a little bit intimidating. You don't have to feel that way. Anybody can atlas in any block, and you don't have to worry about, am I going to complete this block? That's not your responsibility unless you choose to make it that. Your observations will just contribute to the overall data set for the block. That's how eBird works. As you enter your data into eBird, eBird just compiles all the data that's been submitted for each of the different blocks. Now, some people choose to be what's called a principal atlaser for a block. And that all that means is that they agree that they will try to make sure that the block meets these 4 criteria. But no one has to do that if they don't want to. So let me just stop now and ask, are there any questions that have come up?
None so far that I see, Charlie, but we'll give just a couple seconds to see if anybody asks anything. Okay. Carolyn has a question. Carolyn, can you use the Q&A button in Zoom, or we can maybe allow you to talk? How's that? Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you know if somebody is possible, probable, or confirmed.
We'll definitely get to that in very shortly, because that's a very big part of this.
There is a question, Charlie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Is it a bad thing to code a species many times over?
Not at all. So let's say for example, you go out one day in the block that you happen to live in and you see robins. Maybe you see them, they're just feeding on your lawn. So you would code those robins, okay? And then maybe a couple of days later, you see robins again, you code them again. And you might see them doing other things, and you'll learn the codes for those other things tonight. So every time you see a bird, you can feel free to recode it. It's not, we're just looking for, it's not that once you see it once, that's the end of it. eBird wants as much data as it can get.
One more question, Charlie.
Okay.
If someone hears robins or a certain species, one time and then realizes that even in another part of the block, you're hearing robins 7 days and more, is it okay if the birds are in different parts of the block?
Yes, absolutely. eBird keeps track of things by GPS, so it can tell where you are as you're submitting your eBird checklist, and it will still know that that location is within that block. And so it just all then goes to the data set for that particular block.
Thank you.
Okay.
And one more question. How do you know if you're getting near the edge of a block?
Oh, that's a good question, because it's so important to only report birds within a block. And so eBird actually will tell you that. As you're walking along, eBird will send up a little warning message that says, warning you're getting near the boundary of a block. So that's one way that you can know. Also, there are digital maps that you can download from the Atlas website, and you can use those on your phone with an app, and you can actually see the boundaries and see your little blue dot as you're walking along, and you'll see whether you're in the block or not. Okay, so now let me tell you what's happened in the Atlas so far. So like I said, this is the third Atlas that New York State has done. It's going to go from 2020 through 2024. We've seen 2 years done so far, and we're in the third. So far, there have been over 2,600 atlasers in this atlas. Now, look at the difference between this atlas and Atlas 2000. It had about 1,400 participants. And I'm guessing that that's because eBird makes it so easy to submit data for the atlas, that so many more people are participating. There have been over 300,000 checklists submitted so far. It's a huge amount of data. So far, atlasers in the state have found 294 species, and they've confirmed that 218 of those species are breeding. So that's great news for the state, but really, we want to start drilling down to more local data. So now, look at this map that shows every county in New York State and how much time has been invested in each one of those counties. So the counties are colored by increasingly darker shades of blue. The lightest means that it has the fewest hours invested. The darkest means that it has a lot of hours invested. And so, for example, Schoharie County right here, you can see it's white. It's only seen 215 hours invested so far. Jefferson County up here in the north has about 1,900 hours. Tompkins County, now Tompkins County, we all know Tompkins County. It's where Ithaca is, Cornell University, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and all the gods of the birding world that live there. They just bird all the time. So far, over 13,000 hours of Atlas time have been invested in Tompkins County. And you can see there's some counties like Monroe and Albany that are this dark shade of blue, which means they're getting a lot of attention. Ideally, we'd like to get that attention spread out. It'd be really nice if some of these Tompkins County birders went over into Cortland or Schuyler County or Yates County and invested some time there. And as you can see up here on the right, this chart, these are the 6 counties that I try to keep track of. Broome, Shenango, Delaware, Madison, Oneida, and Otsego. And you can see all of those counties are in that sort of middle range, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 hours have been invested so far. Now, what I want to do is focus down even more on specifically Delaware and Otsego counties, because that's where most of us are from. And in Delaware County, there has been submitted so far 2,200 checklists from 111 atlasers. Delaware County has a total of 166 blocks, and 56 of those are priority blocks. And notice that makes sense. We said there should be about 1/3 would be priority blocks. 56 is about 1/3 of 166. There are no complete blocks in Delaware County. It would be nice. There are some that are really getting close to being complete, and I'll point those out to you very shortly. What we want to do is try to increase that number. So far, atlasers have found 154 species within the county, and they've confirmed 101 of those. It's about 66% or so. That's pretty good. We still have 3 more years to collect data. Otsego County is similar. There's again been just over 2,200 checklists submitted, this time from 101 atlasers. Otsego, of course, is smaller in area than Delaware, so it has fewer overall blocks, just 109, and 37 of those are priority blocks. But Otsego County has 6 complete blocks already, which is really great. I actually tell you, there's only 1 county in the whole state that has more complete blocks than Delaware County. Dutchess County has 7. So I think that's really a good thing to know about Otsego County. In the county, we found 147 species and confirmed 110 of them so far. That's just about 75%. Now, for me as an Atlas coordinator, what I want to know is what is happening in every single one of the priority blocks in the county, really in all the blocks, but I really am focused on the priority blocks. And so what I did is I made myself this little graphic. It's really just an Excel spreadsheet that lists all of the priority blocks, this time in Delaware County. You can see over on the right here, here's Delaware County with its quadrants. These are the priority blocks within Delaware County. I set them up like this so I could kind of just get a vision in my head of geographically where everything is. And then I have a lot more information too. I've colored all the blocks based on how many species have been coded within the block. So if there's been at least 80, it's a bright green color. Between 60 and 80, that's a lighter green. 40 to 60 is this rose color. 20 to 40 is this tan color. And then yellow means under 20 species have been found in the block so far. And so as a coordinator, I look and I think, okay, well, the northern part of Delaware County is looking pretty good. There's quite a few green areas, either bright green or light green. But this area over here down by Margaretville and Fleischmann's, that could really use some attention. Look at this. Fleischmann's CE has had 0 species found in it. That means nobody's gone there to look for anything. Same thing in Margaretville, both of the Margaretville blocks. Same thing down here in Sager. There's been 13 species found. Now, the /0, so like it says 13/0, that means 13 species coded and 0 of them confirmed as breeders. Now let's just contrast that, for example, with this block, Treadwell CE. So Treadwell CE is colored bright green because so far 91 species have been reported in this block and 43 of them have been confirmed. Now think about that for a second. Remember, what we're looking for is at least 80 species in a block and 50% of those confirmed. Well, heck, 45 is 50% of 90. This block is really close to having that 50%. And Pam Peters has been volunteered to be the principal atlaser for the block. That's why her name is there. And N equals 2.28 for me says there have been 2.28 nocturnal hours invested in that block. That means this block is just inches away from being complete. If we could confirm 3 or 4 more species, it would be done. And all of these bright green blocks are close to being complete. Some of them have nocturnal hours, some don't. Some of them have principal atlasers, some don't. Let me now show you some of the information for Otsego County. Oh, and down here, just before I go, here's some information for some of the non-priority blocks. As you can see, people are birding, like for example, here's Treadwell CW. People are birding in that block, and that's okay. But what I'd really love to do is to get some of the people over here in Margaretville and that area to start birding down there. Here's Otsego County. Now, just looking at the graphic, I can see right away, this county is in wonderful shape. There's so much green there. Really, when you look at it, most of the blocks are green. There's some that are this rose color. Remember, that's between 40 and 60. There's a couple that are that tan color, and just one that's the yellow color. The birders in Otsego County have been very active. And so just for example, let's look at this block, Edmiston CE. It's had 106 species reported so far. 56 of those have been confirmed as breeders. That's more than half. Tom Sallow is the principal atlaser in the block. And so far, 2.5 hours of nocturnal time has been invested. This block is complete. And that's what that little check means for this is just on my own personal nomenclature. that reminds me then which blocks are actually complete. And here's another block right next to that, Edmiston Northwest, that is also getting close to complete. It has the nocturnal time. It has 90 species reported. It just needs a few more to get up to that 50%. Hopefully, that block will get completed maybe this summer. So what my job is as a coordinator is, first of all, to get people to complete blocks, but secondly, to start to move people to the blocks that don't see as much action, like South Valley CE or Schuyler Lake, those blocks there. They need more work. And again, here's some of the non-priority blocks down here that have seen quite a bit of action. Edmiston CW, it's had 93 species reported so far. So people do bird in non-priority blocks, and that's okay. But we also want to get the data in front of the priority blocks for the scientists of the future. So once again, I'll ask, are there any questions at this point?
If nocturnal hours are spent and no coding happens, how does that rate with the system?
That's a good question. And what happens is the time is the thing that's important here. And so eBird knows how long you've been out, and it will record it and add it into the total to get it up to the 2 hours. Now, the problem is the checklist, unless it has some recorded species, won't actually show up in the checklist for the block. Checklists with 0 data in them don't show up as information in the block, but the time is recorded. So it's perfectly fine. And since this has happened to Sandy and I on a number of occasions, we go out in an evening, we listen for nocturnal birds. We generally sit in our car and we stop and we listen in a place for 5 or 10 minutes and then drive on another half mile or so and listen again for 5 or 10 minutes and so on. And it's happened to us a number of times that you just don't hear anything. No owls, no nothing. That's still okay. That's still nocturnal time that's been invested, and eBird will credit the block with that time.
Another question, is the boundary warning new?
Yes, it's quite new. It only came out in the most recent updates of eBird, which came out like in April or late April or early May. So it may be that if your app hasn't updated lately, you should go to the App Store and update the app yourself, because it may not be that you have, if you have an old version, it may not be warning you about the boundaries.
Another question. This person says, currently my phone can't handle eBird. Can I try listing birds and then get on the website? Absolutely,
sure. You can definitely just keep a paper list of birds like you would do all your life pretty much. And then when you go home, you'll enter in your data on eBird. Now the difference is when you're doing it on your phone, the phone's GPS informs eBird of where you are and also what time you started and how long you took to do it, how far you traveled. You'll have to enter in that information yourself when you do it online. You'll have to say, I went on May 17th and I was out for 2.5 hours and I traveled about 2.3 miles, that sort of thing. The phone does that all for you. But yes, you can definitely report it on your computer online. But I do also say most phones can handle eBird. You don't even need cell service to be able to use eBird out in the field. You only need cell service at the very end when you're trying to submit your checklist. But that you can always do once you get home.
And what if someone doesn't have a smartphone?
Then you really need to take the route of recording your observations on paper and submitting them online once you get home.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's move on. Now, we'll answer that question that was asked. How do you know what behaviors get classified as possible, probable, or confirmed breeders? And there's really 4 categories, as you can see in my list here: confirmed, probable, possible, and observed. The darker the thing, the more important it is, just my little silly picture. So in this observed category, that is for species that are around, but there's no evidence of breeding, or they're outside of their breeding season. Like, for example, let's say you see a cardinal at your bird feeders in the wintertime. Well, that is not breeding season for cardinals. And so that cardinal just gets recorded as having been observed. It gets no code in eBird at all. But it's useful data to know that cardinals are around in Oneonta in the wintertime. Or perhaps you might see a sandhill crane flying overhead, and just flying. Doesn't look like it's going to land anywhere soon, anywhere near you. That bird is called a flyover. And so when you'll see that when we do eBird, you will give it a code of F for flyover. And that also falls within this observed category. But the real categories that we're interested in start with this, the possibles. This is what birders do all the time. And I want to emphasize this. If you go out birding, you do this, you can start contributing to the atlas now. So the first thing is, when you go out birding, you might see, for example, a Carolina wren in a bush. That's an adult in suitable nesting habitat during breeding season. That bird gets coded as a bird in appropriate habitat and H. That's what we do as birders. We look around and say, oh, there's a robin, there's a blue jay, there's a red-tailed hawk. We're finding those birds, and they're all, at this time of year, in breeding season and in suitable habitats. So those birds all get coded as H. So if you're a birder already, all you need to do is start recording H's. Or if you're walking through the woods and you hear a scarlet tanager, if you know bird songs and can identify the bird by its song, then that bird gets coded as a singing bird, S. So each code is the first letter of whatever happens to be the category that the bird gets put into. So this is a singing bird in suitable habitat. And these 2 things, H and S, are the 2 codes that call birds possible breeders, meaning they've been found in the block during breeding season, so maybe they will be breeding in the block. We can't really say, but it's possible. And I just want to say right now, all the observations that you see, like singing bird or the other behaviors that we find, they all should be coded in eBird, no matter what time of year it is. So even, for example, if you saw this Carolina wren and it was singing in February, let's just say. Now that's not really its breeding season, but that's okay. It is still a singing bird, and you're allowed to record it in eBird. Now what's going to happen after the atlas is over is that the eBird and breeding bird atlas scientists will start to go through all of these observations and winnow out the ones that aren't really important or appropriate. But you don't need to make that decision. If you hear a singing bird, you record it, no matter what time of year. The only code that doesn't fit that idea is this H inappropriate habitat. That has to be during breeding season. So when you see a Carolina wren in the wintertime, if you just see it, it gets no code. If it's singing, it would get that S code. Now, those are the only 2 categories for possible breeders. Everything else is more important than that. And so, for example, we want to move now to how do you find probable breeders in a block? Now, I'm not going to tell you all of the different behaviors that fit as probable breeders. If I did, this presentation would just take too long. But I'm glad for anyone that has a question about breeding behaviors and breeding codes, I can send you all kinds of information. I can send you the complete list of breeding codes with examples of each code. I'm glad to help you learn about breeding codes. So, but here's some of them. Let's say you find a pair of hooded mergansers. Here's a male and a female. This is a pair in suitable breeding habitat during breeding season. Here they are swimming in the water. It's a local pond. They very well might breed there. We code those as P for pair. And now we know that hooded mergansers are probable breeders in that block. It's way better, more likely that they're going to breed than the tanager that we just heard singing. Who knows if that will breed there or not. Or if you see one bird chasing another, like here, these are terns, one chasing the other, or just for example, when Sandy and I were out the other day, we saw one male red-winged blackbird chasing another male red-winged blackbird. So what's happening in that situation is that male is either defending its territory or its intended mate by either fighting with the other bird or just chasing it away. That's called territorial defense, and that gets a code of T. You see this all the time. Lots of birds are very aggressive when it comes to other birds. One woman was telling me she saw, it was hooded mergansers, in fact, 2 males in the pond were pretty much fighting over one of the females that was there. And finally, one of the males just swam away. That's what we call territorial defense. Or, I mean, who hasn't driven down the road and seen turkeys off in the field, the males displaying with their tails all fanned out and their feathers all puffed up? Those birds are advertising, here I am, ladies, let's mate. So that bird is displaying for the females. Or you might find birds in courtship behavior. For example, at your feeders, you might see a male cardinal take a seed and approach a female cardinal. And that female cardinal will probably start fluttering her wings, indicating that she's receptive to this male, and he will then feed that seed to the female. That's a courtship behavior. And the female is learning that this male is likely to be a good provider for our children when we have babies. Or you might see mourning doves sort of grooming each other as they sit side by side. All of those behaviors fit in this idea of courtship, display, or like my kestrels that I saw at the very beginning there, they were copulating. Copulation also fits in this category. All of those behaviors get a C. Or also, this time of year, you certainly have seen bluebirds or tree swallows checking out nest boxes. You know, the male flies up to the nest box, looks inside, flies away, maybe comes back and looks inside again. Maybe the female comes over and checks it out. Those birds are visiting a probable nest site, and they would get a code of N. So you see, this is all stuff that you can commonly see as a birder. The thing you have to do when you're atlasing, though, that's different than birding is when you're birding, all you care about is, oh, there's a species, there's another one, there's another one. Here, we not only say, oh, there's bluebird, but let's see what that bluebird is doing. And so you spend a little bit more time watching the bird and trying to see what the bird is doing. And this visiting probable nest site also applies to birds that nest in shrubs, for example. Like, for example, if you're out on the edge of a road, maybe there's some bushes near a field, you might see common yellowthroats going into a bush, coming back out, going back in, coming back out. Yellowthroats nest in shrubbery, and so those birds are visiting probable nest sites. They would get this code of N, meaning that they are probable breeders in the block. Now, to confirm breeding, you might think that's hard to do, like I have to find a nest with eggs, but it's really not. Finding a nest with eggs is pretty unusual, but there are lots of other behaviors. For example, you might be out in the field and notice, hey, look at that little field sparrow there. It's got some grass in its beak. The reason it has grass in its beak is because it's carrying nesting material. And when birds are carrying nesting material, they're going to build a nest. That is inspired by the hormones that are raging inside of them because of the breeding process. And so scientists know that when birds are carrying nesting material, they're going to breed in the block. That confirms breeding. they get a code of CN. Notice these codes have 2 letters, confirmed codes have 2 letters. All the rest of them just had 1 letter, like P or S, for example. Or ospreys are getting more common here in Otsego and Delaware County. You might see an osprey flying in with nesting material to its nest. It's actually building its nest. It gets a code of NB for nest building. You just have to be careful with this because some birds, like wrens, make what are called dummy nests. A male house wren, for example, might fill 3 or 4 boxes with nesting material. And what he's hoping is that the female will come along and look at these boxes and say, hey, I like this one. Let's start a family right here. So if birds are nest building, as long as they're not wrens or woodpeckers, because woodpeckers also make dummy nests, then they are coded NB, and that confirms them breeding. Or right now, you're certainly seeing little goslings all over the place. These are recently fledged young, still dependent on their parents. They get a code of FL. It confirms that Canada geese have bred in the block. Later in the summer, you might see an adult, say blue-headed vireo, along with 3 juveniles. And those juveniles are fluttering their wings, begging to be fed. Those are recently fledged young. They're still dependent on their parents. That's the important thing, that they're still dependent on their parents. You might see a chickadee carrying a little worm like this one is. Or you might see a robin gathering worms on your yard. When birds pick up food, if they're going to eat it, they do it right away. Or if they're scared off, they'll fly to another branch and then eat it. But if they're just carrying the food, that means they want to bring it back to their nest because there's young in the nest that needs to be fed. So they get the code of CF for carrying food. You have to be careful with this code. With a lot of codes, you have to be thoughtful about them. For example, corvids like blue jays, crows, ravens, or raptors like red-tailed hawks or peregrine falcons. Those birds commonly carry food. For example, blue jays will take food and they'll cache it for later use. So you have to look at the bird and say, okay, does that bird look like it's flying off directly to a nest, or might it just be going to cache its food somewhere? As long as it's going to head to a nest, like for example, if you see a crow heading towards the top of a pine tree, directly towards it with food, then it's probably going to feed young. It gets the code of CF. Or you might actually see the adult. For example, here's an adult house sparrow feeding its young. That gets a code of FY, feeding young. This is something I didn't know before I did the previous atlas. When baby birds excrete their wastes, of course, they don't have diapers. Their wastes come out in a membrane that's called a fecal sac. The adults take those fecal sacs and drop them somewhere outside of the nest so the nest doesn't get fouled. So when an adult is carrying a fecal sac, that confirms that breeding has happened. And then finally, sort of the holy grail of atlas, you might find a nest with eggs. It's only happened a few times for me. I found a mourning dove nest with an egg in it. I found junco nest with a couple of eggs in it, but it doesn't happen very often. When it does though, it's really cool. That gets the code of NE for nest with eggs. Or you might even find a nest with baby birds in it, nest with young. Now you don't have to see the birds though. For example, the other day we were out in Hobart, and when I got out of the car, I could hear a lot of raven noise. And so I was looking, and it seemed to be coming up from these pine trees that are up on a hill. And I just watched for a little while. And the adult flew in. And as the adult flew into that area, the sound got really loud. What was happening there was there were young ravens in a nest in those pine trees. They were begging as loud as they could for food. So I could code that as a nest with young, NY. There's lots of information on the eBird Atlas website. So notice it's ebird.org/atlasny. If you just go to ebird.org, that's the eBird website, but that's not the Atlas website. The Atlas is part of eBird. And if you're the kind of person that's going to record data on paper and then submit it, you'll go to ebird.org/atlasny to submit your data. There's also a New York Breeding Bird Atlas Facebook group where people ask questions. I'm a moderator on that group, and people ask lots of interesting questions or contribute sightings that they've seen. If you're still confused about things like this little guy is, you can certainly contact me. Remember, my name is Charlie Scheim. Here's my email address and my telephone number. I'm glad to answer questions by email or texting or phone calls. And are there any questions right now that someone would like to ask?
So Charlie, as I listened to a Cape May warbler today, I knew that it was traveling through. I coded it singing bird, and then I made a little note that I knew it was traveling through. Is that a bad thing?
No, that's exactly what you should do. This is a singing bird. It doesn't matter the time of year or the place. We know the Cape May warblers don't breed around here, but who knows? Maybe they're expanding their territory. You do record that kind of information, and later on, the scientists at the Breeding Bird Atlas will either weed that out or include it, depending on what they think is appropriate.
Excellent.
Okay. Now, I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about eBird to let you see what we have to do with that. So here's the thing. Lots of people are resistant to using eBird. But when you think about it, 20 years ago, when you were driving somewhere, how did you get there? Well, you had to get out a map and look at the map and figure out how to get there. But now, I don't know anybody really that uses maps anymore. Instead, they just do the GPS on their car or their phone and let the GPS take them there. Technology has changed how we live. And it's the same thing with birding. We used to write down all our observations on paper, but now there are apps like eBird to let you record the data. If you just Google "get started with eBird," you'll go right to a page that tells you how to start an account. You can take a course that tells you how to use eBird, and I want to do a bit of that right now. So when you enter data into eBird, you can either use your phone or your computer at home. Either one is okay. There's an eBird mobile app for your phone, either iPhone or Android, or you go to ebird.org/atlasny for the computer. The important thing, just like when you're on the computer, you have to go to the Atlas NY section of eBird. On your phone, you have to do what's called setting the correct portal. This directs the data to the Atlas. And you just go to your settings and you click on settings. You'll see portals in the settings, and you will make sure that you pick the New York Breeding Bird Atlas portal. And once you do that, you're ready to go. So I just want to say, if you're a person that already does eBird, all you have to do the Atlas is change the portal and start entering breeding codes. There's nothing else. You're practically there already. And if you were going to start eBirding right now, you would just click Start Checklist, and you're ready to go. And when you click Start Checklist, you'll get this little window that shows a whole bunch of species. And if you'll notice right up here, it says likely species based on a certain number of checklists in a 20 by 20 kilometer block. So this is the list of all the birds that you're likely to see in the area. Let's say, just for example, that we saw 2 catbirds. One of them was singing in a bush. The other is carrying some food, let's say. So you could, if you wanted to, right up here where it says number, species, name, and so on, you could type in 2 gray catbirds. Or you can enter in some abbreviations, 2GRCA, that's called the banding code. Gray, GR, catbird, CA, the first 2 letters of each word. Or you can even just type in like 2 gray or 2 cat. eBird will then list all the birds that fit with gray, like maybe 2 gray catbirds, or also gray cheek thrush, or black-throated gray warbler. And you just say, oh yeah, I wanted gray catbirds. You'd click that. And when you click it, you'll get this little window. It says 2 gray catbirds. You can change the number if you want right here. If you're an eBirder already, this is what you already do. And at this point, eBird is just click done, either here for Androids or up here for iPhones. They're done and they're done, but we're not. We are doing atlasing, and so we need to put in breeding codes. And there's a little window right beneath the 2 that says breeding code. You click in that window, you'll get a little window that has all the different breeding codes as little buttons. So remember, it was H and S for habitat and singing bird, territorial, courtship, nest building, feeding young, and so on, including all the codes that I didn't tell you about. These are all the possible codes. So let's remember our catbirds. We saw one of them was singing and one of them was carrying food. Carrying food is way more important, right? Because that confirms the catbirds as breeders. So you always want to pick what's called the strongest code, the one that gives the most weight to the species. So we pick carrying food, you click that, and when you do that, into that breeding code pops up CF carrying food. And notice, even if you can't remember what all these letters on the buttons stand for, the words happen right there, CF carrying food. You can just start clicking buttons until you see the words that you want. But you very quickly learn all of these codes. So to do that, your little checklist would say, I've got 2 gray catbirds and they were carrying food. And let's say that you birded for a while longer. And here's all your birds that you found. 2 mourning doves, they were coded as a pair. Red-bellied woodpecker, that was coded as being in habitat, and so on. And it's time to stop the list. So you just click, amazingly enough, stop. And eBird will ask, are you sure you want to stop? And you'll just click, yep, stop the track. And now you're at the final page where you put in a little bit more information. You'll tell eBird your location. When you click that, you will see either some suggested locations by GPS coordinates, or there's a map that you can just click your location on the map. Notice it also tells you your portal, the New York Breeding Bird Atlas. Make sure that's what the portal is. Right below that, it says stationary. On this left-hand phone, on the right-hand one, the iPhone, it says traveling. There were 3 kinds of checklists, really. Traveling, stationary, or incidental. Traveling means you're out birding and you're moving along, either walking or canoeing or whatever. eBird will keep track of how long you've been birding on that checklist and how far you went. You can edit those if for some reason they're not correct. But that's a traveling checklist. On the other hand, if you're just sitting on your deck in the backyard watching birds, you're not moving, that's a stationary checklist. eBird then knows there's no distance to worry about, and here's how long the person was doing the stationary checklist. Or finally, if birding isn't your main purpose, maybe you're driving to the grocery store and you see a pair of red-tailed hawks, or maybe you're out walking the dog and you see a mourning dove. You want to record that. That's an incidental report, and so you can do that as well. Notice eBird also lets you say how many observers there were, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And if there's more than 1, it will let you share the checklist with those people. Finally, the last thing is this question. Are you submitting a complete checklist of the birds you were able to identify? Now, all that means is the birds you were able to identify. It's not saying, did you identify every single bird you encountered? Maybe you couldn't. You know, you saw this bird, no idea what it was, or you saw, you heard a vireo, you have no idea if it's a red-eye vireo or a blue-headed vireo. But as long as you identified checked off all the birds you could identify, then this is a complete checklist. But if you were saying to yourself, look, I see so many darn robins, I'm not going to even include them in my list, then you haven't really done a complete checklist, and so you'd answer no. When you're all done with this, you click continue. You're done. And once again, I'm saying you don't need cell service. When you create your eBird checklist, you only need it to get the location and then to finally submit it. So you click continue, you're done, and we're done too. So once again, I'll ask if there's any questions, but before we do, I just want to say that Sandy and I are glad to come and meet with people. We take groups out for walks in the woods to talk about how you do the atlas and how you use your phone to do eBird. I've met with people individually at their house to help them get used to breeding codes or eBird or whatever. We're glad to do that. We like doing it. And so if you would like us to come to talk to you, or you have a couple of friends that you want us to talk to, we're glad to come along. So any questions?
Yes, Charlie. This student asked, if I am on eBird in the New York BBA portal, and I go to another state to bird on vacation, do I need to get out of the portal? Will that mess up the data?
Okay. If you remember to get out of the portal, that's good. If you don't, though, eBird is smart enough to know that this data is coming from a place that's outside of New York State, and it then reroutes the data into just the general eBird data set rather than the BBA data set. So it will take care of it for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hang on.
Okay.
Okay. I don't appear to be any more, and by golly, your methods are marvelous.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you've all enjoyed this talk. I hope I've inspired you to get out and do atlasing, or at least learn how to do it. And like I said, I'm glad to help you learn how to do it. Or if you're an experienced atlaser and you just have certain questions, please ask them and I'll try to answer them as best I can, or I'll find someone who can answer them for me. Okay.
Charlie,
well,
there was one question that came in right at the very end there.
Okay.
What if I've been submitting checklists to eBird but didn't use the Atlas portal?
This is a good question. Yes, because this definitely has happened. You can change the portal. So you can go back to a checklist. You go to the eBird website, Atlas, go to ebird.org, just the eBird website, because your checklist is on eBird. And you go to manage my checklists, find the checklist, and you can, in there, change the portal. And you can change it to the New York State Breeding Bird Atlas. So even checklists that you might have done 2 years ago, back in 2020, let's say, you can change those to Atlas checklists. And of course, you should then put in the breeding codes that you want to put in too. And that is really useful. Say, for example, if you saw red-tailed hawks nesting in your area, that's data that we want. And so that is a great thing to do.
Nice. Well, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much, Charlie.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to do this. I just love atlasing, and I love trying to help other people get atlasing.
It shows, which I so appreciate that. Very good. I will just mention that we did record tonight's presentation, and the recording will be available at the DOAS website next week, probably. I'm traveling next week, so it may not go up for kind of an extra couple of days. But I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can process it all on Monday and get it online. But it will end up there. So if you want to share it or you want to refer back to some of those wonderful explanations from this evening, it will be available for people, and feel free to share that with others. Well, I think that's it for us tonight. We're looking forward to the EV car show tomorrow and hope to see some of you there. I know I'll see some of you there because I recognize some names from our plant sale. So we look forward to it, and happy birding.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you again.